Welcome to Legally Agile with Chris Werner.
In the last episode, I walked through the AI regulatory landscape and made the case that the environment isn't simplifying, it's fragmenting. And I said that the organizations that navigate this best aren't the ones tracking every regulatory development in real time. They're the ones that build governance systems that are robust enough to absorb change without requiring constant reconstruction. So today I want to tell you what the system actually looks like. Not in the abstract, not a list of principles that sound good, but what to do on Monday morning. I want to provide you a practical framework for building an AI governance system that is durable, defensible, and designed to handle a regulatory environment that will keep changing whether you're ready for it or not. My name's Chris Werner. I'm a business attorney and advisor, and I work with companies and leadership teams to build legal governance and infrastructure that makes AI adoption sustainable. And this is the episode where I want to show you how that infrastructure gets built. Before I get to the framework, I want to spend a few minutes on why most AI governance systems fail, because failure modes are instructive and avoiding them is half the work. So the first failure mode is when you build compliance not for operations, but out of fear. The first failure mode is when you're building for compliance and not for operation. The most common governance system failure that I see are systems that are designed to satisfy a compliance checklist rather than to actually govern AI use inside a real organization. So this produces governance that looks right on paper. The policies exist, the documentation exists. Someone can produce a binder if asked for, but it doesn't function as a system. Employees don't know the policies exist or they don't understand the policies. The approval process is so cumbersome that people route around it, and the documentation doesn't reflect what the organization is actually doing. A governance system built for compliance will pass an audit under favorable conditions. It will not hold up, however, under adversarial conditions. So if a regulator comes in and really pushes you, or you're involved in litigation, that system is not going to hold up. And on top of that, it's not actually reflecting and changing how your organization makes AI decisions. And that's the thing that matters. The second failure mode is that you're building for today's rules and not for change. This is a system that's designed around a specific requirements and specific regulatory framework at a specific point in time. This is the organization that builds its AI policy around the EU AI Act as it existed in 2023. And now, of course, it needs to rebuild it because the act has been amended and additional guidance has been issued. Or it's the organization that built its AI employment practices around one set of EEOC guidance and now faces a different set of state law requirements that existing practices don't satisfy. The point-in-time compliance systems require constant reconstruction. And in a regulatory environment like we're seeing in AI right now, constant reconstruction is not sustainable and it's not sufficient. By the time you finish reconstructing your governance to address what was then the current point in time, you're ready to change it again because everything has changed. So the third failure mode is systems that are built without operational ownership. This one I've talked about in an earlier episode, and I see this way too often. So your governance is designed without a clear internal ownership. Your policies might be drafted, your framework could be established, and then it's handed to no one. So nobody's maintaining it. And a governance system without an owner is not a system. It's just a set of documents that were accurate at the time they were written, and they'll become progressively less accurate as the organization evolves and the environment evolves. So all three failure modes have a common root cause. It's treating AI governance as a project with a completion date rather than an ongoing operational function within your organizations. The organizations that build durable governance are systems. Those are the ones that understand from the beginning that this is something they will be doing continuously and not something they will finish. So, a governance system that survives regulatory change is not built around rules, it's built around principles that translate across rules. Principles that satisfy today's requirements and they'll satisfy tomorrow's because they reflect what responsible AI governance actually requires, regardless of which specific law is asking. For design principles, every element of a durable governance system should satisfy all four. So here's the four principles. Principle one, govern AI at the use case level, not at the tool level. Most organizations govern AI by maintaining a list of approved and prohibited tools. That list is fine as far as it goes, but it gets outdated almost immediately. The tools change, new tools emerge, existing tools add AI capabilities without changing their name. A durable governance system governs use cases, not tools. So, in other words, what is the AI being used to do by your organization? What types of decisions is the AI making or influencing? What type of data is the AI touching? And what are the consequences if the AI performs incorrectly? Use case governance is much more durable because use cases are stable in a way that tools aren't. Using AI, for example, to screen job applicants is a use case that carries consistent regulatory implications regardless of which specific tool you're using to do it. So you want to build your governance framework around the use case. And if you do that, it survives tool changes, vendor changes, and model changes without reconstruction. So the second principle of good design is build your documentation practices that serve multiple masters. And what do I mean by that? Every major AI framework, the EU AI Act, state AI laws, existing federal law that's being applied to AI requires some form of documentation. They want to know what the AI is being used for what purpose, and with what data. What's the human oversight, and what's your risk assessment? The temptation is sometimes to build documentation practices that satisfy specific requirements of the most immediately applicable regulation. The problem is that documentation that's built for one framework often doesn't satisfy another. So, a durable documentation practice answers 5 questions for every AI application. What does the system do? What data does it use? What decisions does it make or influence? What human oversight exists? And what has been done to mitigate risk of harm? Those 5 questions will satisfy the EU AI Act. They satisfy state AI law disclosures and impact assessment requirements. They also will satisfy the types of questions that a sophisticated plaintiff's attorney is going to ask in discovery if something goes wrong. They're also incredibly important to your board of directors and executive teams because they allow them to understand and make informed decisions about AI deployment. And that's critical because your board of directors are going to face more and more scrutiny over how they are assessing and making decisions about how your company is using AI. So you want to build your documentation practices to answer those 5 questions consistently. And if you do so, your documentation serves every master simultaneously. The third principle is you want to design your oversight mechanisms for the risk level of that decision. Not every AI application requires the same level of human oversight. So, a governance system that requires full human oversight and review over every AI output is going to be bypassed by your team. It makes your organization too slow and they don't want to do it. On the other hand, a governance system that applies a light touch oversight, even to high stakes AI decisions, is going to fail the moment one of those decisions goes wrong. A durable oversight framework is tiered. Low stakes AI applications, such as internal productivity tools or content drafting assistance, data analysis without consequential outputs, those operate within defined parameters with monitoring, but maybe not mandatory human review of individual outputs. On the other hand, high stakes AI applications, anything that's influencing employment decisions or credit decisions, anything that's influencing healthcare decisions or legal outcomes, or any significant financial transactions, those require meaningful human review of the consequential outputs before any action is taken. This can't be a rubber stamp. It has to be actual review by someone with the authority and the experience to override the AI recommendation when necessary. The critical governance question is not, do we have human oversight? It's what is the level of oversight, and is that proportionate to the level of risk? That proportionality principle appears in every serious AI regulatory framework. So building it into your governance system means building something that satisfies the regulatory logic, not just the letter of the law. The fourth principle of the design is build the update mechanism into your system from the start. This is a principle that most governance systems omit, and they suffer because they omitted it. So a governance system that can't update itself isn't durable. It's fragile. It'll be accurate at the launch, and it'll become progressively less accurate as the regulatory environment changes, as the organization use of AI evolves, and as the tools and vendor stack changes. Durable governance system has a defined update mechanism built into it. It has a scheduled review cycle. So at minimum, you want to do it annually, and you want triggered reviews when material changes occur. So a process for monitoring regulatory developments and assessing their impact on your governance model. You also want a clear owner for initiating and completing those updates and version control practices that preserves the history of what the governance model said at any particular point in time. So pay careful attention. That last point's important. Version control. It matters more than most organizations realize. When something goes wrong, and the question is, what did your governance model say at the time of that decision? You want to be able to answer very precisely. So organizations that can provide time-stamped governance records have a materially different legal posture than organizations that can only produce whatever their current policy is right now. So these principles are necessary, but they're not sufficient. And the question organizations always ask me is, where do we start, and what does the build sequence look like? So there are 5 phases, and they're sequential. This is how I would design it. 5 phases, and they're sequential. And they're sequential for a reason, because each one builds on the next. So it doesn't make sense to skip a step, because then you're going to end up in one of the failure modes that I described earlier. So phase 1 is you've got to map your current state. Before you design your governance system, you need to know what you're governing. That means a complete inventory of your current AI use, every tool, every vendor, every internal application, and every use case you make of the AI, not just the ones that your IT department knows about, but the ones your business units are using independently. You also have to address the AI capabilities embedded in software and any tools that individual employees are using without formal approval. This inventory process almost always produces surprises. Organizations consistently discover AI use they didn't know about. And the unknown use is where you typically have your highest risk activity, because it hasn't been subject to your governance review. So you want to map your current state before designing anything. And you can't build your governance unless you understand the landscape fully. Phase 2, once you do that, you want to assess your risk profile of what you find. Once you have your inventory, you want to classify each AI application by its risk profile. What decisions is it influencing? What data is it using? What are the consequences of an error? And who are the affected parties? A simple 3-tier categorization is sufficient at this point. High risk, medium risk, low risk. That's sufficient. High risk applications get immediate governance attention. Medium risk applications get a structured review and some defined oversight requirements. And low risk applications get documented, and there's operating parameters and some monitoring. The risk assessment is also the foundation of your compliance gap analysis. Comparing your risk classifications against regulatory requirements applicable to each use case tells you precisely where your governance gaps are and how urgent each one is. That's the starting point of the conversation I have with a lot of organizations, and it's almost always more clarifying than they expect. So phase 3 is you want to build your core governance infrastructure. Once you have your inventory and risk assessment complete, you want to build your 3 core elements of governance. First, the use case policy framework. What is permitted without review, what requires structured approval, and what is prohibited. This needs to be written in language that employees can actually apply and adopt. It can't be a copy of a statutory language or a regulation. Second, you want the review process, design the review and approval process. You want to know who reviews what and what level of scrutiny with what documentation is required. You want to tier this to the risk level of the decision, and it should be designed to be fast enough that people will actually use it. If it's too slow, people will ignore it and go around it. Third, you want the accountability structure. Who owns the governance function? Who participates in it? And what capacity? You want to know who has the final authority on disputed decisions and who's responsible for maintaining the system over time. This is a piece I discussed earlier on an AI accountability, and it's the piece that determines whether everything else holds together. Phase 4, you want to implement and documentation and monitoring practices. Once you have the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure in place, you want to implement documentation and monitoring practices that make governance system visible and auditable. So documentation. So for every high risk and medium risk AI application, you want to create and maintain a record that answers the 5 questions I described: what it does, what data it uses, what decisions it influences, what the human oversights that exist, and what risk assessment has been done. This documentation doesn't have to be elaborate. It has to be accurate, current, and retrievable. So then you want monitoring. You want to establish a feedback mechanism where to determine how your governance systems are working. Are employees actually following the approved process? Are the approved tool lists and prohibited lists staying current? Are there use cases emerging that the current framework doesn't clearly address? So a governance system without a feedback loop is not self-correcting, and a governance system that can't self-correct is going to drift from reality over time. Phase 5 is you want to build your update cycle. This is the final phase, and it's the one that makes your system durable. You want to design and implement an update cycle that has a review cadence, quarterly for active monitoring of regulatory developments, annually for a comprehensive governance model review. You want to identify trigger events that prompt an unscheduled review, things like a material change to the regulatory landscape, a significant change to your AI vendor tool stack, or new high-risk AI application, or an incident or near miss that surfaces a governance gap. You want to document your review process itself, and when the review happens, you want to know what gets examined, what gets updated. You want to know who approves the updated governance model and how updates are going to be communicated to your organization. So a governance system with a documented update process is a living system, and without it, it's just a snapshot. So I want to take a moment to say this seems complicated, but it doesn't have to be. The best governance systems don't have to be the most complicated ones, but they have to be the ones that are following a program and are actually being used by the companies. The ownership piece of your governance system is important, and it's one that a lot of companies miss. So getting it right is important. Documentation needs to be accurate and needs to stay updated. The moment an employee or a customer or regulator starts asking hard questions about your AI practices, the gap between your documented governance and your operational reality can become a problem if your governance isn't done correctly. It's where most governance systems will either earn their value or they'll fall apart as a failure: what you've documented and who owns it. A governance model that's never tested against real decisions will never show the gaps in your system. The most useful thing you can do after building your governance system is to run 3 or 4 real decisions through it. Run a new tool request, run a new use case proposal, a new vendor renewal, and see whether your process actually works as it was designed. Once you do that, you can make changes that are necessary that will work with your organization. That combination, so clear ownership, actual operation, and a built-in updated mechanism, is what separates a governance system from just a governance document. And the difference between being prepared for the next regulatory development and being surprised by it that's where the gap lies. Here's the bottom line. On building an AI governance system that survives regulatory change, the system that works is not the most elaborate one. It's the one that's built on durable principles. Use case governance, documentation that serves multiple masters, oversight proportionate to risk, and an update mechanism built from the start. Sequence through 5 phases, map the current state, assess the risk profile, build the core infrastructure to implement documentation and monitoring, and build an update cycle. That system satisfies today's regulatory requirements and will satisfy tomorrow's regulatory requirements. And when something goes wrong, because it always will, it gives you a defensible record of how decisions were made. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and you've been able to take something from it. If you're at the beginning of your journey and would like an assessment of where you are, please reach out to me. And if you'd like to start designing a robust governance practice that will help you maintain your AI governance through the changing environment, please reach out to me at vidarlaw.com, and I'd be happy to have that discussion. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to talking to you again next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.